Mark and Lisa had finally found their sanctuary. After months of searching, they settled on a charming tree-lined neighborhood with pristine lawns, white picket fences, and quiet streets where kids still played outside until sunset. Everything about the place screamed peace and safety. Exactly what they wanted after the chaos of city life. The house was perfect. A modest 2-story with a wraparound porch and a small garden where Lisa dreamed of planting roses. Mark could already imagine weekend barbecues and late-night talks under the stars. But as they unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, an uneasy feeling began to creep in, a shadow lurking just beyond the neat hedges and freshly painted mailboxes. Their first encounter with the neighborhood's HOA, the Homeowners Association, came unexpectedly, like a chill in the warm afternoon air. As Lisa tended to the garden, 2 men in matching navy polos with the HOA emblem approached. They looked official, but not like the friendly neighborhood volunteers Mark had expected. Their eyes were cold, calculating, and their smiles didn't reach their faces. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the taller one said, his tone polite but clipped. "We're with the HOA enforcement team. We noticed your garden decorations include a few items that aren't compliant with the community guidelines." Lisa glanced at the small ceramic gnomes scattered among her flowers. "Oh, I thought the rules were just about paint colors and lawn maintenance." "That's a common misconception," the shorter man replied. "There are strict rules about garden decor, signage, and even the types of plants allowed. We'll be sending you the official guidelines shortly." Lisa nodded politely, though a flicker of unease settled in her stomach. "Thank you, I'll look for that." As the 2 men walked away, Lisa felt eyes watching her from across the street. A middle-aged woman pulled her blind shut quickly, and a teenager peered out from behind a tree, then ducked out of sight. The neighborhood's charm suddenly felt fragile, like a beautiful mask hiding something less friendly. Later that evening, Mark asked Lisa about the encounter over dinner. She recounted the men's visit, her voice steady, but her fingers twitching nervously. "They didn't say much, but something about the way they looked at me. It felt more like a warning than a welcome." Mark frowned. "Maybe they're just strict about rules. I've heard some HOAs can be intense." "Maybe," Lisa said. "But there was something off, like they wanted to make sure I understood who was really in charge here." Days passed, and the neighborhood carried on its peaceful rhythm, but Lisa couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The quiet streets seemed quieter now, as if holding their breath. At night, she'd hear the faint hum of a car idling down the block, only to vanish when she looked outside. One morning, while checking the mailbox, Lisa found a typed letter sealed with the HOA's emblem. The letter was polite but firm. "Please be advised that certain items in your garden are not in compliance with HOA regulations. Failure to remove these items within 72 hours may result in fines and further action." Lisa showed the letter to Mark, frustration and worry flashing in her eyes. "It's just gnomes, Mark. How can this be grounds for fines?" Mark's jaw tightened. "We'll figure this out, but something tells me this is just the beginning." That night, as they locked the front door, a shadow moved just beyond the porch light's reach. Lisa's heart quickened. The neighborhood wasn't just quiet. It was watching, and the HOA cops were ready to remind them exactly who held the power. It was late afternoon, the golden light soft against the windows, when Lisa was alone in the house. Mark had stepped out to run errands, leaving her with a quiet house and a growing sense of unease. She tried to focus on pruning the rose bushes in the front yard, but every creak of the floorboards or rustle of leaves made her jump. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door sliced through the calm. Lisa's heart pounded as she wiped her hands on her gardening gloves and approached cautiously. Through the peephole, she saw two men, stern-faced, dressed in the same navy polo shirts, with the HOA emblem she'd come to recognize. The HOA cops, as neighbors had jokingly called them, but their smiles today were anything but funny. Lisa opened the door, forcing calm into her voice. "Hello, we need to speak with you about a violation," the taller man said immediately, his tone curt. "It's come to our attention that you have been hanging laundry outside on your porch, which is expressly forbidden under Section 4, Paragraph 12 of the HOA Guidelines." Lisa blinked in disbelief. "Laundry? It's just a small rack with a few clothes. It's not visible from the street, and it's not permanent." "That's irrelevant," the shorter man said, stepping forward. "Rules are rules, and you've been warned previously. This is your final notice." Lisa felt her chest tighten. "Warned? I haven't received any previous notices about laundry." The two men exchanged a glance, an unspoken message passing between them. "Consider this your formal warning," the taller man said. "Failure to comply will result in fines and potential legal action." Lisa's voice rose, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "This feels like harassment. You're targeting me for no reason." "We enforce rules evenly," the shorter man replied smoothly. "Everyone in this community is expected to comply." Lisa's mind raced. Why was she the only one being singled out? She thought of her neighbors. None of them seemed to mind laundry or small personal touches on their properties. The feeling that something was deeply wrong gnawed at her. Then, before she could say more, the taller man's gaze hardened. "We suggest you take this seriously, ma'am. It's in your best interest not to push back." Lisa's fingers curled tightly around the doorframe. The threat hung in the air, cold and unyielding. She looked into the men's eyes and saw no hesitation, no doubt. They believed they held absolute authorities as they turned and walked away. Lisa felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. The sense of safety she'd clung to was unraveling, fast. Later that evening, Mark returned home to find Lisa tense, staring out the window as shadows lengthened across the yard. "They were here," she said quietly. "They threatened me over laundry." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Did they give any warning?" "Not before today," Lisa answered. "Just a warning now, with threats." Mark's jaw clenched, anger mixing with concern. "This isn't about laundry. They're trying to intimidate you." "Us." They sat in silence, the weight of what had happened sinking in. The quaint neighborhood facade was cracking, revealing a harsher reality beneath. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Lisa found small, anonymous notes slipped under their door, cryptic warnings to follow the rules, and keep quiet. Surveillance cameras appeared overnight, mounted on nearby trees and streetlights, their lenses always trained toward Mark and Lisa's home. Neighbors avoided eye contact, and the friendly waves Mark and Lisa had expected faded into nervous glances and hushed conversations. Lisa felt trapped in her own home, a prisoner of rules wielded like weapons. But amid the growing fear, a spark of determination ignited within her. She wouldn't be bullied into silence. Whatever this HOA cop squad wanted, they were going to regret picking her as their target. Mark sat at the kitchen table, a stack of HOA documents and community rules spread before him like a battleground map. The more he read, the clearer it became. The so-called rules were vague, contradictory, and often selectively enforced. But the growing hostility from the HOA enforcers was no accident. Lisa, meanwhile, was growing more restless by the day. The silence around their house was suffocating. The subtle threats had escalated into overt intimidation. Their once friendly neighbors now whispered behind curtains and avoided the couple's gaze, as if afraid to be seen supporting them. One morning, Mark noticed fresh tire tracks in the gravel driveway that didn't match their own vehicles. A black SUV, unmarked but unmistakably out of place, had been parked just beyond the curb. No driver in sight when Mark pulled up. It was the kind of surveillance that sent a clear message. "We're watching." That afternoon, Lisa found another letter slipped under their door. This one a formal notice stamped with the HOA seal. It listed a laundry of alleged violations, many ridiculous. Unauthorized garden decorations, improper lawn edging, even complaints about a broken fence post that Mark was certain had been fixed weeks ago. The letter concluded with a chilling warning. Failure to comply will result in immediate fines and legal action. Mark's frustration boiled over. This isn't about rules anymore. It's personal. They want to scare us, push us out. Lisa nodded, her expression grim. "I think they're trying to break me." Then, one evening as the sun dipped low, a knock came at their door again. Mark opened it to face the two HOA enforcers from before, their faces colder, more determined. "We need to inspect the property," the taller man said bluntly. "There are ongoing complaints that require immediate attention." Mark stepped forward. "Complaints? What complaints?" "You've already fined us without cause." The shorter man smirked, a dangerous glint in his eye. "We're just doing our job. Compliance is mandatory. Refusal could lead to further penalties." Lisa appeared behind Mark, steady but fierce. "You're trespassing without a warrant. This isn't a police matter." The HOA cops exchanged a look. Then the taller man's voice dropped to a threat. "Think carefully about how you respond. We have the authority to escalate this." Mark's pulse quickened. The phrase, "authority to escalate," hung between them like a storm cloud ready to break. The lines between neighborhood rules and law enforcement blurred in a way that felt sinister and unlawful. He shut the door firmly. "We're not intimidated." Behind the door, Lisa whispered, "They're playing dirty." As the days passed, the harassment worsened. Anonymous calls at odd hours, strange noises outside their windows, and the unshakable feeling that someone was lurking just out of sight. Mark decided it was time to fight back. He began meticulously documenting every interaction, every strange occurrence, every unjust letter. He also reached out to neighbors, hoping to find allies. But the neighborhood had grown silent. Fear had planted its roots deep. One evening, as Mark reviewed his notes, a message popped up on his phone. "Stop digging, or face the consequences." The threat was clear and chilling. Mark stared at the screen, heart pounding. They had crossed a line. What started as petty rule enforcement had become a campaign of intimidation and fear. But Mark and Lisa refused to bow. Somewhere in the shadows of this perfect neighborhood, a battle was brewing, and they were ready to fight for their home. Neighborhood that once felt like a safe haven now seemed like a cage of whispers and secrets. Every friendly nod Mark and Lisa had expected was replaced by furtive glances and hurried conversations behind curtains. The air was thick with unspoken fear, and the garden-lined streets echoed with an unsettling silence. Mark and Lisa tried to maintain their normal routine, but the feeling of being watched followed them like a shadow. Surveillance cameras had appeared overnight on lampposts and trees nearby, their glossy lenses tracking every move. Strangers in dark cars prowled the streets, their presence unexplained and unnerving. Lisa began noticing more subtle signs. Packages left untouched on their porch, neighbors avoiding the walkway past their house. Even the local mail carriers, quick, anxious greetings. It was as if the entire community was slowly closing ranks, pushing them out with cold invisibility. One afternoon, while checking the mailbox, Lisa spotted a crumpled note tucked inside. It was unsigned and hastily scrawled, "Stop digging. Some stones are better left unturned." Her hands trembled as she showed it to Mark. The message wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. Mark's jaw tightened. They want us to be scared, but we're not. Determined, Mark started knocking on neighbors' doors, hoping to find allies. Most either hurried away or gave vague answers, afraid to get involved. But one door finally opened fully. Mrs. Evelyn, the elderly woman who lived a few houses down, was known as the neighborhood recluse. "Come in," she said, her voice low but firm. "I've been watching this mess for years." Inside her cluttered living room, walls lined with books and faded photographs, Mrs. Evelyn shared her story. Decades ago, she had fought a corrupt HOA that used intimidation and false fines to control the community. "They're not just enforcing rules," she warned. "They're running a racket, and it only gets worse if you don't stand your ground." Lisa listened, a mix of hope and dread stirring inside her. "What can we do?" Mrs. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Knowledge is your best weapon. The HOA has to follow the law, even if they try to hide behind their power. But they'll try everything to break you first." Over the next few days, Mark and Lisa began gathering evidence, documenting surveillance cameras, saving threatening notes, and recording every interaction with the HOA cops. They started piecing together a disturbing picture. The HOA cops weren't just enforcers. They were enforcers with a hidden agenda. One evening, as they reviewed photos of suspicious vehicles parked near their home, a sudden knock startled them. Mark peered through the window and saw two figures lurking in the shadows. Before he could react, the power suddenly cut out, plunging the house into darkness. Lisa grabbed Mark's arm, whispering, "They're here." The blackout wasn't an accident. It was a message. The silent threat that had been building for weeks now took on a tangible form. They were being cornered. As darkness closed in, Mark's mind raced. This wasn't just about garden rules or laundry anymore. It was a battle for their home, their sanity, and their freedom. With a deep breath, Mark whispered back, "We won't back down." Outside, the neighborhood lay shrouded in silence, but the war beneath the surface was just beginning. The next morning, the house still bore the eerie silence left by the blackout. Lisa and Mark sat at the kitchen table, the weak light from the window doing little to chase away the shadows inside their minds. The weight of the previous nights, events pressed down on them, like a storm waiting to break. Mark rubbed his temples. This has gone beyond anything we imagined. They're not just petty rule enforcers. They're playing a game we don't understand. Lisa nodded. But what game? And how do we win? Determined to find answers, Mark decided to explore the neighborhood more thoroughly. Walking the streets, he noticed things he hadn't before. Subtle signs of resistance. Doors with locks, changed overnight, curtains drawn tight, and the occasional flicker of sympathy in a neighbor's eyes before they quickly looked away. It was on one such walk that Mark's path crossed with Mrs. Evelyn again, the elderly recluse who had offered a hint of hope days earlier. She invited him inside, a warm glow from an old lamp illuminating her cluttered living room. The scent of aged books and lavender filled the air. "You're braver than most," she said, her voice low but steady. "Most folks here have buried their heads, hoping the problem will vanish." Mark settled into a worn armchair. "We can't let them win. But we need to understand what we're really up against. Mrs. Evelyn's eyes flickered, with a hint of something fierce beneath her calm. The HOA cops aren't just about rules and fines. Years ago, when I fought them, I uncovered something darker: money laundering, blackmail, even bribery. They used the guise of community order to cover their tracks. Mark's heart pounded. Why haven't the authorities stepped in? Because they're clever, she said. They hide behind layers of paperwork, legal jargon, and a culture of silence. Most people are too scared or too comfortable to speak out. She pulled out a faded photo album, revealing old newspaper clippings about previous battles and shady HOA dealings. I'm old, but I still have contacts. People who want to see this neighborhood free again. Lisa's voice was steady when Mark returned home with the news. We have to fight smarter, not just harder. Inspired, Mark and Lisa began strategizing. They collected evidence meticulously: photos of suspicious vehicles, recordings of threatening encounters, and copies of every intimidating letter. They reached out anonymously to a local journalist Mrs. Evelyn recommended, hoping to shine light on the HOA's abuses. But the more they pushed, the more the intimidation intensified. Late at night, the sound of footsteps circled their house. Unmarked cars appeared at odd hours. The notes under the door became increasingly sinister. One evening, Mark discovered a hidden camera installed in the garden. Cleverly disguised as a sprinkler head, the realization hit hard. They were not just being watched, they were being targeted. But with Mrs. Evelyn's stories and the evidence mounting, a fierce determination took root. Mark and Lisa weren't just victims anymore. They were becoming the neighborhood's unexpected resistance. The question loomed: how far would the HOA cops go to silence them? And what secrets were they desperate enough to protect? As Mark stared out the window at the darkened street, he whispered, "This fight is bigger than us, but we're ready." Lisa squeezed his hand. No more hiding, no more fear. The neighborhood might be silent, but beneath the surface, the battle lines were drawn, and the quiet war for justice was only just beginning. Days blurred into nights as Mark and Lisa's quiet resistance grew bolder. The neighborhood had become a minefield of tension, every shadow hiding a threat, every silence hinting at betrayal. But the couple refused to back down, their resolve hardened by the knowledge that they weren't alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark was at his desk, organizing evidence, when Lisa called out from the living room, "Mark, come here, now." He hurried into the room and froze. The front door was wide open. Lisa stood just inside, eyes wide with fear and fury. They broke in. They went through everything. Mark's heart pounded. The breach wasn't just an invasion of their home. It was a message. "We can get to you anytime." Frantically, they checked their computers, phones, and files. Most of the physical evidence was untouched, but the fear was suffocating. Whoever had come in knew exactly what to look for and what to leave behind to keep them guessing. They called the police, but the officers who arrived seemed disinterested, treating the incident as a minor break-in. Mark suspected that HOA's influence ran deeper than anyone wanted to admit. That night, as Mark and Lisa lay awake, the walls around them felt closer, the shadows longer. But there was something else now, a spark of defiance. "If they think this will scare us off," Lisa whispered, "they don't know who they're dealing with." Determined, Mark decided it was time to confront the HOA directly. He requested a meeting with the HOA board, insisting they explain the harassment and intimidation tactics. To his surprise, the request was granted, but only under strict conditions. The day of the meeting, Mark and Lisa arrived at the HOA office, a sterile building with polished floors and an unnerving quiet. The board members sat behind a long table, their faces masks of polite control. The discussion was a thinly veiled game of threats and denials. The board insisted all actions were within their authority, accusing Mark and Lisa of provoking neighbors and violating rules. When Mark pressed about the break-in, the room stiffened, and one member smiled coldly. Sometimes disturbances happen. We expect residents to keep the peace. Mark left the meeting more certain than ever. The HOA was a tightly wound machine of power, and anyone challenging it risked everything. Returning home, Mark and Lisa found their mailbox stuffed with flyers from a local attorney specializing in HOA disputes. The message was clear. They weren't alone. Inspired, they reached out to the attorney, who advised documenting everything and prepared to help challenge the HOA's overreach legally. But the intimidation escalated. One night, Lisa spotted figures lurking just beyond the streetlight's glow, their faces obscured, their intentions clear. When Mark called neighbors the next day, none admitted to seeing anything. The isolation was maddening, but Mark and Lisa clung to each other and their growing network of support. Then came the phone call that changed everything. A whispered voice on the other end warned, "You're poking a hornet's nest. Back off, or pay the price." Mark's blood ran cold. The stakes had been raised. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Mark felt something new. A fierce certainty that the truth would come out. "They underestimated us," he said, locking the door behind them that night. Lisa smiled, a fierce glint in her eyes. "Let them try to scare us. We're not going anywhere." Outside, the quiet neighborhood seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move in a battle no one saw coming. The days that followed the threatening phone call felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of uncertainty. Mark and Lisa lived with the knowledge that every step could trigger another retaliation. But with each threat, their resolve grew stronger, fueled by a determination to expose the truth. Their attorney arranged for a formal complaint against the HOA, demanding an independent investigation into the harassment and intimidation. Mark and Lisa finally felt like they had allies beyond their small circle. Then, one evening, Lisa noticed something odd on the front lawn. Fresh footprints, muddy and large, leading toward their back gate. She called Mark immediately. When Mark arrived, he spotted the footprints, but also something more alarming. The garden gate had been forced open, the lock broken clean off. Inside, the backyard showed signs of a struggle. Upturned flower pots, footprints pressed into the soil, and a faint scent of gasoline. Mark's heart raced. "They came here to send a message," he said grimly. Lisa's voice was steady but fierce. "We're not scared." That night, they installed additional security cameras, reinforcing every window and door. Yet the sense of vulnerability lingered. The next day, Mark received an anonymous envelope containing a USB drive. Inside were video clips showing the HOA board members meeting in secret, discussing ways to silence residents who challenged their authority. There were moments of chilling coldness, threats veiled as casual remarks. It was proof, irrefutable and damning. Mark shared the footage with their attorney, who confirmed it was enough to spark an official inquiry. But before they could act, another message arrived, a cryptic warning left on their doorstep. "You're digging too deep. Some secrets are buried for a reason." Despite the mounting danger, Mark and Lisa knew they were close to breaking the case wide open. The community's silence was starting to crack as whispers of corruption spread. Then, late one night, Lisa heard noises outside, voices low and urgent. She peeked through the curtains and saw a group of neighbors gathering near the community center, speaking in hushed tones. The following morning, Mark knocked on doors, finding neighbors willing to talk. Quietly, cautiously, but willing nonetheless. The fear was slowly giving way to courage. The breaking point had come. Lisa and Mark organized a community meeting, inviting residents to share their stories and unite against the corrupt HOA leadership. The turnout was small but significant, enough to signal a shift. People spoke of fines for minor infractions, harassment, and the oppressive atmosphere that had ruled their neighborhood for years. The HOA board tried to deny the allegations, but the evidence and testimonies were mounting. Mark stood before the crowd, voice steady and passionate. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every homeowner here who deserves respect and fairness. The energy in the room shifted. For the first time, fear was replaced by hope. But the battle was far from over. As Mark stepped down, Lisa caught his eye. There was a warning in her gaze, an unspoken message that this fight had just reached its most dangerous phase. Outside, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the final act. The community meeting marked a turning point. The whispered fears that had once shackled the neighborhood erupted into voices united in defiance. For the first time, the oppressive silence was shattered, and the corrupt HOA leadership found themselves exposed. But with the light came shadows. The threats intensified, subtle at first, broken windows, vandalized mailboxes, eerie notes left in doorways. Then, more blatant acts, tires slashed, mysterious late-night phone calls, and once again, those unsettling figures lurking just beyond the streetlights. Mark and Lisa refused to retreat. They had allies now, neighbors who had found their courage, and an attorney ready to take the fight to court. The evidence was overwhelming, the public pressure mounting. One afternoon, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. The tension was palpable as residents crowded into the small community hall, eager to confront those who had ruled with an iron fist. Mark stood tall, presenting the evidence, the videos, the threats, the intimidation. The room buzzed with whispers and gasps as the board members squirmed under the scrutiny. Then came the twist. Just as Mark was wrapping up, the doors burst open. A man in a plain suit entered. A city official with an unyielding presence. He held a thick folder. "Good afternoon," the man said, voice steady but commanding. "We've been investigating this HOA for months. What you're seeing is part of a much larger scheme involving fraud, embezzlement, and organized intimidation." The room erupted. Mark's jaw clenched. "So, this goes beyond our neighborhood." The official nodded gravely. Far beyond. This HOA was a front for illegal activities, funneling money out of the community and silencing dissent. Today, several board members are under arrest. Shock rippled through the crowd. Lisa whispered, all this time, they were criminals hiding behind rules. As officers moved in to take the board members into custody, the residents felt a collective breath release. Years of fear finally lifting. But the victory was bittersweet. The man in the suit turned to Mark and Lisa. "Your courage sparked this investigation. You stood against the intimidation when others would not." Mark shook his head, humbled. "We just wanted to protect our home." The official smiled faintly. "Sometimes standing for your home means standing for justice." As the neighborhood began to heal, Mark and Lisa knew things would never be the same. The scars of fear and suspicion lingered, but so did a new sense of community, stronger, more vigilant, and fiercely protective. In the days that followed, neighbors who had once turned away now greeted them warmly. Walls of silence crumbled, replaced by conversations and connections. One evening, as Mark and Lisa sat on their porch, the setting sun casting a warm glow. Lisa sighed. "It's over." Mark nodded. "For now, but we have to stay ready." Lisa smiled, eyes sparkling with quiet strength. After all, the real cops are the people who stand up for what's right. And as the night settled over the quiet streets, the shadows seemed less threatening. Because this time, the neighborhood knew who held the true power, not the false authority of intimidation, but the unbreakable spirit of its people.